What's up, guys? PBnJ are back. It's me, John. I'm here with Patrick and Brian, and we're gonna do something a little different today. If you listen to our last videos, we've been reviewing movies and talking about TV shows and sports and all kinds of things. But we're all at heart big comic book fans. We've been collecting for a long time, and we noticed that in our conversations offline, we always end up coming back to comics because we read them, you know, and we read them and buy them every week or every month, and we're always talking about them. The biggest stories or the hot comic and stuff. And we kind of noticed and that we should probably start recording these conversations because we 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 do have a lot of knowledge and a lot of history with comics, and we decided to start focusing our content more towards that. So to kind of give a background of why we talk about comics so much, we're gonna do our own origin story episode, how we started reading comics and why we love them so much, and then maybe you guys will find these stories interesting. So, Patrick, how did you get started in comics?
Hey, what's up, guys? All right, this is my origin story for collecting comics. All right, now seriously, I've been collecting for almost 40 years. Um, Collecting comics is a lot of nostalgia for me and a lot of excitement because I like to hunt for the comics that I want. But anyway, the foundation of me collecting comics was when I used to watch Saturday morning cartoons and weekday cartoons with my older brother on this 19-inch black and white TV that had an antenna. Yeah, it was back then in the 70s. And I'm telling you, I watched a lot of cartoons, kind of like, I don't know if you guys remember Popeye, of course, Scooby Doo. Remember there was a Georgia the Jungle cartoon,
Yeah, yeah.
and of course, Amazing Spider-Man, the Super Friends. I loved a cartoon called the Herculoids, and Space Ghost. And then later in the 70s, it transitioned to anime like Battle of the Planets and Star Blazers.
Oh
But
yeah.
the list just goes on and on and on. But I gotta tell you, collecting comic books really started with me because I loved candy and Star Wars. Now I know that sounds weird, but check this out. I saw the original Star Wars in the movie theater with my brother, and it was seriously the best movie I've ever seen. It was my favorite movie when I first saw it, and to this day, it's still my all-time favorite movie. So as like a kid, when I was like 8 or 9, my mom would sometimes give us 50 cents, and that was a lot of money back then to buy something we wanted at the local 7-Eleven store, which meant that I could buy tons of candy. And I usually got lemon heads because that was my favorite at the time. Um, Now here's the thing: my brother and I would walk like a couple of miles on Saturday and Sunday. And I remember we were 8 and 9 by ourselves. Sometimes I look back and I'm like, I don't know if that was really legal. And I'm wondering if my parents were just trying to get rid of us.
Not
I'm not
not
really
today,
sure
man.
yet,
Not
but my
today.
mom thought it was safe back then. It's a different time. I'm like, okay, whatever. So anyway, we would go to the 7-Eleven and I would get my lemon heads or a Slurpee. But after I saw Star Wars, when I went to the 7-Eleven store, I saw these Star Wars wax packs. I don't know if you guys have ever seen those, but it's a little wax package with 7 Star Wars cards in it and a pack of gum or in a piece of gum. And I was like, what? And that's when I started collecting. But it was Star Wars cards. It wasn't comics. I never collected a comic yet. I did notice the comic books on the wire rack, and because I watched the cartoons, I started looking at them, but I never collected them. I only collected Star Wars cards. And then later, as I got older, somehow I transitioned from collecting Star Wars to comic books. Now, I'm a little fuzzy on the actual first comic book I bought, but I'm pretty sure that it was in June or July of 1983, and I bought Alpha Flight number one. And actually, the reason why I think it's that one, because I actually bought 10 of them, and I still have those 10 today. You guys might ask why I bought 10, but that's for a different story. That's for a different episode that might be coming up later. But yeah, that's how I started collecting comic books. So it was actually 1983. That's when I actually bought my first set of comic books.
And I know not too long after that in the 80s, that a lot of people consider that like kind of the golden age of comic books. That's when you had stuff like Dark Knight came out and Watchmen. Um, a lot of big stuff from Marvel too. So that's kind of like you kind of jumped in at a good time, you know.
Yeah, no, I definitely remember buying Dark Knight. I
Hmm.
bought Dark Knight 1 through 4. I bought 2 of the Dark Knights. My dad, I didn't even have any money. I went with my dad into this comic book store, and I said, "That is an awesome comic book." And then I said to myself, "That's gonna make a lot of money." For some reason, I just said it. I'm like, "Dad, that's gonna be worth so much money." He goes, "You want to buy like 10 or 20?" I'm like, "No, I just want 2, because the cover is cool." And he goes, "Okay." So I bought them right then and there. And then uh, at that time, I went to some comic conventions, and at that time, you could trade people. I'm not going to tell you what I traded, but I did trade one of my Dark Knights. But again, that's for another episode because that was probably one of the dumbest trades I ever did in my life. Uh,
Hey, I got a question for you. So back then, were there any value in comic books, or was it just like for the love of reading the comic book by itself?
um, no, there was some value in comic books. I mean, obviously, there were some that were pretty expensive. So I'll tell you a little story about my brother. He knew that I liked comic books. I mean, we always watched the cartoons together. And for my birthday, one of my birthdays is probably 1984, 85, I guess. Um, he surprised me for my birthday. He never really bought me anything for any of my birthdays. And all of a sudden, he gets me like a Daredevil #1. A Daredevil #1. That's what he gets me. I'm like, what the heck? How did
Yeah.
you even get the money to buy this? Because I saw it at the comic book store. And I believe at the time it was, I don't know, I think it was like $150 or something, but that's a lot of money back then, especially when you're like 13 or 14 years old. Um, and I hated it because I didn't like Daredevil at all. So actually, I traded that Daredevil. I traded that Daredevil for 10 X-Men. Um, he wasn't too happy with me. He's all, "Dude, I bought you Daredevil #1 to help you start off your collection." And I'm like, "Yeah, but I don't even know who, I hate Daredevil." And then I said, "But I love the X-Men." So yeah, I got a bunch of X-Men. I got 95, 96, 2 100s, 101, through like a 120, a bunch of them. Uh, and I felt so bad that like 20 years later, I ended up buying a Daredevil #1 again. And then I told him about it. And he goes, "Yeah, but you gave away my Daredevil #1 to get your X-Men." I'm like, "Okay." Anyway,
But
yeah,
you
that's it.
probably thought you were a jerk.
I'm sure he did. I'm sure he did. So yeah, that's and so actually what happened was is because I was watching all these cartoons like Challenge of the Super Friends, I fell in love with certain characters. So the way that I collect comics is I collect the first appearances of all the characters that I love. Like some of the villains that I have the first appearances of. I've Gorilla Grodd. I loved him. I have Captain Cold, um, and Sinestro. So those are probably some of the first comic books that I collected the first appearances of. Oh, and Mixoplick from Superman comics. I actually have 4 of those. Um, so that's really how I started. It all started with watching cartoons.
And real quick before I tell my story, just for you guys listening, Patrick is actually a very, very good comic book investor, and we're gonna go over that in future videos. But he's kind of the eBay master, the CGC guy. When I have questions about value and worth, we always go back to Patrick. So we'll get to those in later videos. But he kind of knows what he's doing in the collecting department.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. In my stories, and I don't really remember this. My mom actually told me the story. But when I was a kid, apparently, we would go grocery shopping. She'd take us to Lucky's. Remember Lucky's?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. And I would disappear, and I would go to the magazine rack while she did the shopping. And probably something that wouldn't fly today, but this was when I was a kid in the 80s. I would sit there and read, and then when she was done, she'd come get me and we'd leave, right? Um, and one day it was just going to be a quick trip, and I went to run to the magazine rack, and she's like, no, 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 it's just going to be quick. I'm just going to grab one or two things. And I guess I told my mom, well, if I don't read this episode, these comics this week, I'm not going to know what happens. And that's when she realized that I was reading, I was following the stories along. Um,
Oh,
and yeah, and I don't remember this at all. I must have been 5, 6, 7. I don't know. Um, and so every once in a while, she'd buy me a comic, or my dad would buy me a comic, or I'd save up what little, scrap, savings for finding quarters and stuff, and I would buy my own, and I would read it that way. So I had sporadic comics here and there, like just random comics, a
mhm.
Spider-Man here, a Batman here, Superman there. Um, and I had just a little collection of like, just like 40 or 50 comics that I would read until the pages came off. And eventually, I want to say I was either 10 or 11. I finally asked my dad. I was like, "Hey, are there any comic book shops around here?" And he goes, "Yeah, I know where there's a shop." And I was like, "Well, I want to read comics. I want to follow along, it's a lot easier to do that than reading whenever I go to the grocery store." And he goes, "Okay." So we went to one that was near my house at the time, and the owners of the shop were really nice, and that ended up becoming my shop. And so I shopped there from 1992 until the store closed in 2015.
That's a
Uh,
long time.
yeah, so yeah, so the owners, they saw me, they would joke that they saw me grow up. The owner said that she saw me when I first came in the store. I could barely see over the counter until just a few years ago.
Oh,
She retired and sold or didn't sell the store, but someone else took it over. But then they moved the store um, pretty far, so I couldn't continue shopping there. So I found another store nearby and stuff that I've been going to the last few years. But yeah, that was how I got started. Is I found a shop, a really good one. It was a local mom and pop store because in the 90s there was a big boom in comics. So you have these huge. I don't know if you remember like Mile High Comics.
oh yeah.
Yeah, you have these huge stores like that, and I don't want to say corporate, but kind of these big, massive franchises. And then there was just a bunch of little small mom and pops, and she was actually fortunate enough to survive the comic implosion in the late 90s, and there was just comic shops closing left. There's not a lot of comic shops now, but there was a ton of them, but she was able to survive until you know just a few years ago, and then she retired. But yeah, that it kind of I mean, that helps when you're collecting, when you have one shop that you go to for 20 some years. They had the pull list, so they had my pull every week, and they got to know what I liked, and they would even throw stuff in there that I didn't normally collect, but it was like a hot comic, and they knew it was going to be a hot comic, and they'd be like, "Hey, just throw one in for John," you know. So it was great. It was great. New shop I'm at is cool, but I've only been there a few years. I don't have the street cred like I did at the other place.
No, that's really cool.
Yeah, yeah, and it was cool, and I was super bummed when it closed. I was like, "Dang, that was a day that I was dreading," and it came and went. So, and then when I got into comics, man, I fell in feet first, like hardcore. My life revolved around comics when I was a kid, more so than now. It still does, but when I was a kid, I was all about it. And I started going to Comic Con in '93, and I've been going to Comic Con every year since. And yeah, and I would, started, learning about not just about reading the comics, but learning about the writers and the artists and the publishers and all the backs. And I started getting Wizard magazine. Remember Wizard?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. You had to get the Wizard because that was how you got all your news. And then, that went away too once the internet came around. Um, so yeah, man, I've been collecting for a long time. My collection got really big. Mainly Marvel and DC, but some other stuff, some Image stuff like Walking Dead. There was a bunch of not a bunch, a few Image comics I read in the '90s because that was the hot, they were the hot company. So a little bit of Spawn and stuff like that. Um, and yeah, and I still to this day, I've been reading. I've been going to the comic shop weekly since 1992. And right now we're in this pandemic, everything's shut down. This is the longest, by far the longest I've gone without buying a new comic book. It's been about 4 weeks that they shut down the comic shop, and that's easily the longest I've ever gone without buying a comic. So this is actually kind of cool because I haven't been able to read anything new for a long time. So I've been able to go back, catch some old stuff, and then we're talking about comics. So it's kind of scratching that itch. But yeah, that's how I got started. And a cool thing with this series that we're doing is that if anyone has any questions about how to start, where to go, what comics are worth going after, we think with our knowledge and our background, we can help. So if you guys have any questions about anything, feel free to drop them in the comics in the comments section. But yeah, that's how I got started, and that's kind of my story. So, Brian, how'd you get it going?
Yeah, before I get into it, I got a question for you. Now that everything's shut down, like, are issues still being published, or is everything's put on hold right now?
Everything's on hold. About a month ago, Diamond Distributing, they distribute all the comics um, nationally or worldwide, I guess. They're the only player in town. So they once they shut down the essential businesses, they couldn't they couldn't have their guys working at the warehouse pretty much. So there's nothing being published or anything right now, and I know they have a whole bunch of comics just sitting in the warehouse. I think, yeah, you know what it was? It was April 1st, actually, was the last day it was the last new comic book day. So I went and I got my last ones. So that was April 1st. So I'm sure in the warehouses they probably have the comics for next week, which would have been April 8th. They probably have them sitting there. And then Marvel and DC stuff, they're not publishing anything. So it's just at a standstill right now. So yeah, I couldn't get any if I wanted to. The store, my shop I go to, they couldn't sell anything if they wanted to. They don't even have it. So yeah, it's just all just a deadlock right now.
No. Okay.
Well, that's ridiculous because it sounds essential to me.
I know we're dying, dude. Especially like that last week, there's some really good stuff, and I'm like, oh, how's this gonna go? So
So
yeah,
they're not putting them out digitally or anything, right? They're
no,
just nothing.
no, nothing. They thought about it. DC and Marvel thought about it, but by doing that, if you release the comics digitally, you're undercutting the stores,
Right.
right? Because now you're like, well, I don't have to shop at the stores. I just buy everything. So they decided not to do that, and they just held off. So they do have good deals, though. If you want to go on Comixology or something, they have good deals on old comics.
Right.
I saw something for Walking Dead, the whole series for like $18. Uh,
Wow.
yeah, that's almost 200 issues for like a limited time. I don't know if it's still going. It was a limited time. That was like a week ago or something. So yeah, if you go on to Comixology, the Marvel app or the DC app, you can find, they're selling back issues are really cheap. So it's actually a good time right now if you want to catch up on some stuff that you missed.
Okay, cool. So my origin story is sort of like Pat's, but in the early '90s. So I used to watch Saturday cartoons all the time, and the one that my brother and I used to watch like in late '92 was X-Men, the animated series.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was on Saturday or not, but I know we watched every single episode.
That was cool.
And so right after we watched the first episode, we were hooked. Like that was my first exposure to comic book characters. And from then on, this was like late 92, right? So it's like from then on we found a local like comic book shop and we would go there on weekends and we would start buying comic books. And of course, like since we were fans of X-Men, we would buy the X-Men comic books. So one of the first ones I bought was um, the one I checked with you, John, was the Fatal Attractions storyline. So at that time, all those issues had holograms on them, so which made it look really cool. And they have different comic books that would continue the story and everything. And also around that time was when Image Comics came out, right? Around
Yeah.
that
Yep.
time. So the comic book store I would go to, they would like have a bunch of these Image comics, and there was one that my brother and I always looked at every time we walked in, and it was Young Blood Zero, number 0.
Oh no. Did you get suckered in?
Because that was like at the time, like that store had that comic book, and that was the most expensive comic book that they had,
Yeah.
and it
Yep.
was like $100 or something back then.
Oh
So I
man.
mean, to like a 12 and 13-year-old, $100 is like $1,000,000 to us. So every time we walk in there, we would always look at it and like, man, we want that comic book so bad because like I don't remember if we read like Wizard or anything like that, but that was like the hot comic at the time. Like
Oh
everyone
yeah.
wanted
Yep.
it. It was super expensive. So instead, we started buying up all their other Image comics like Savage Dragon, the Max. They're all junk, you know.
Yeah, yeah,
I have
yeah.
the first issue of the Spawn. Um, yeah, so I mean, we bought a bunch of them, but like X-Men was the one that we followed the story for. And we did that for about a few years, and then we just kept watching the series, and then kind of dropped off on collecting comic books for a while. And then fortunately there was like movies started getting made for these comic books, and that's kind of how I got sucked back into it. But out of the three of us, like I'm the one who knows the least since I came in late, and I don't read as much as you guys do. So I mean, I'm more familiar with the movies and things like that. So yeah, that's how I got into it.
Very nice.
Yeah, I mean it's cool. Yeah, I think we're gonna have fun talking about comics coming up. Like I said, it's all our passion and stuff, and I constantly, like I was mentioned before the shutdown, I was reading every week. I was always going to get my my pull list and stuff. But I mean, we're gonna have a lot to talk about coming up. So, we'll be talking about different topics. We're gonna be talking about our favorite comics. We're gonna be talking about our comics we don't like, favorite characters, and then we'll also get into some like I don't want to say business stuff, but kind of like we'll talk about grading your comics. We'll talk about comics to buy that are good investments that we think might be coming up soon. That value might be coming up, and like the differences between CGC grading, PGX grading. Like we're gonna talk about a lot of stuff. So stay tuned for that. And if you guys have any questions that come up, drop them in the comments, and we'll try to get to them and answer them the best we can. But yeah, stay tuned. I think I'm excited. I think these guys are excited about what we're going to come up with, and yeah, stay tuned. You guys, you guys got anything else you guys want to mention?
Well, I just want to add, like, one of the things I like about collecting comics is just to be able to touch the book and to look at the art, mainly the art. Like that's the one thing that drew me into like collecting comic books in the first place. Like what being able to watch it on TV versus like holding it in your hand and reading it, and looking at every panel and the cover art. Like those are all the cool things about comic books, just collecting them and reading them. So um, maybe you guys have different other like opinions to add to it.
So
Uh,
you're not a digital guy.
I'm not. I mean, like it's just same with reading. I'm just like I need to hold
Yeah.
whatever it is. Like if I'm reading something.
No, I'm with you, man. I'm with you. I have bought digital comics, like stuff that I've missed. There was an example in the late last year. There was a big X-Men story that kind of relaunched the whole X franchise, and I believe their comics were called Powers of X and House of X, and one of them, issue 2, was so under ordered, or there was a shortage of it because the first issue was so popular that there was a big shortage, uh, and my store didn't get any. And so they were like, well, you can, they're like, we're going to order more and you will get them like in a week or two. but I wanted to read it so bad that I bought the digital copy just so I could read it. And then I read it. I got the digital copy, and I was like, cool. Got the storyline because the storyline was weekly. So if you missed a week, it was gonna back me up. So I read the story, got caught up, and then I eventually did get that copy late when they got more in. Um, but yeah, it's not the same. I needed to know that story, and then I got the actual hard copy. So I
Did
know
you read
Pat.
it again? Did you read it again?
Oh yeah,
Yeah, because it's different, right?
it's
Because
different.
you get to feel the paper, you smell it. I know that sounds weird, but no, seriously, you smell the comic and you look at it. It's I don't know if you guys have a ritual when you read comics, but I'm very careful when I flip the pages, make sure that nothing gets ripped or torn. Yeah, I don't want my fingerprints on the cover or anything like that. I've read a couple online. It's just completely it's a different experience for me.
It's different. Yeah. I mean, it's cool for someone who's not a collector. They just want to know what's going on. That's it's perfect for them. They can read it and they can just know what's going on, and they don't necessarily want to have the comic or they don't have the space because I mean, comics take up a lot of space.
Yeah.
And they don't have the space, so they just read them, and that's cool. That's I mean, I've done that before. Um, my cousin's husband is a big Star Wars fan, and I was reading the Star Wars comics, so I would use the digital code I got in the comics, and I entered to the Marvel app, and then that way he could read uh, the Star Wars comics. He kind of
Oh,
followed, yeah, because I already had them. So, but he wasn't interested in getting the actual comic because he doesn't have the room for it. So, I mean, it has its plus and minuses. Um, but yeah, I'm definitely. I want the actual comic, and then also the collectability issue comes in, right? If it's digital copy, it's worth nothing. You know,
right.
You can get Walking Dead issue 1 on the digital, and who cares? It's not worth anything. But you have the actual comic. Okay, now you're sitting on some money.
But not only that, it's fun to hunt for the comic. Like say for instance, you want to collect the entire series of Walking Dead and you're missing like I don't know, issue like 35 or whatever it is, like the first governor. And it's you actually have to find it whether it's online or you go to comic stores. That search is exciting. It's
Oh
like a
yeah,
quest, like you're on
yeah,
a quest to
yeah.
complete your mission. It's pretty cool.
I mean, I remember doing that back in the day at conventions. Like,
Yeah.
oh man, I need to get these 20 issues of Avengers from the 70s, and I would hunt them down. Spend the day hunting, and like once you got them, it was like, yeah, I accomplished my quest and took them home and stuff.
Exactly.
No, I
Yeah,
got
it's
you,
a
I
lot of
got
fun.
you. But you said you mentioned a ritual earlier. I used to when I was a kid.
Hmm.
I used to get so back in the 90s, Superman used to come out weekly, and
Okay.
so I would separate my comics. I would read Superman first, and then my other comics I would separate, and I would put all the X titles together and the Spider-Man titles together, and I would read them that way.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, so I would read Superman first, and then I would read like I don't know X-Men and Wolverine if that came out that week, and then the next set I would read like Spider-Man and Venom, and then the next would be like the Avengers comics, and then that's how I used to separate them out, and then I would read them.
That's awesome, dude.
Yeah, I did that for a long time. Looking back, I did that for a long time.
Oh man.
Probably until like probably when I was got to high school, I was still separating them. And then
Uh,
eventually, Superman stopped doing that. They just started going like monthly, like normal, and then that kind of messed up my flow. And then now I just read them. And I just pick them out of the bag and read them.
all right. On. What about you, Brian?
No, I don't really have one. I don't buy enough of them or on a regular basis to be like reading them in any uh, special way or anything. So I think the last one I bought was about like 3 or 4. No, it has to be almost 5 years ago. So it's been a while. Like since I moved up here, I haven't walked into a comic book store. So it's been a while since I bought a comic book.
I understand. I understand. Life gets in the way sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Luckily, I've been able to avoid life, so I can just keep focusing on comics. But yeah, so anything else you guys want to throw out there before we sign off?
Nope. Just stay tuned for our next episode. You guys are gonna really like it, I think.
Yeah, stay tuned, guys. It's going to be exciting. This is something we're super passionate about. Fortunately, we have a lot of knowledge on it too. So, uh, yeah, maybe you guys will find some learn some interesting stuff you didn't know beforehand. But with that, we'll sign off and say thanks for listening and stay tuned. See you later, Pat. See you later, Brian.
All right, see you guys.